Let's see. Where was I? Yeah, so I, w- I I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when you're vulnerable, when you don't have access to a deeper dimension, you become vulnerable to surrogates. And in the US and in the West generally, at this point in history, hopefully we're kind of on a little bit of a sunset or a waning or an ebb of some of this. But it's been the case for the past decade plus as kind of a crescendo. That part of the void left, the way I see it, at least one way of looking at this is that part of the void in sort of the disassemblage of Christianity and of traditional norms and kind of the ways that we socially, culturally, historically had connected with the transcendent, connected with God. In the wake of so much of that being, you know, um, can't think of a good word right now. Forgive me. Broken apart or deconstructed. It's kind of an overused word, but we'll just say deconstructed. There's this major, to be kind of trite, God-sized hole in many people's hearts, in many people's spirits. And and so you've got all these sort of counterfeit meaning-making systems that rush in to fill the void. And that's a lot of, I think that explains at least some, perhaps a lot of what's going on with the kind of explosion of leftist ideology in the US, and especially for younger people who, I mean, again, this is a much bigger conversation, and the reasons I got kind of wrapped up in it are complex in some ways, but at least part of it is just that you are looking for meaning and that you want to do something worthwhile with your life and contribute something to the world. And change the world, make the world a better place. I think that is a part of it. There's kind of an ideological or idealistic thing that happens there for a lot of people, which is sad because it's such a corrupt and corrupting and unhealthy way of moving through the world, but it captures a lot of people. Anyways, and so I can say, during that season of my life, I was so in pain, you know, looking back, just so out of alignment, just not at all. Just, man. And I ended up having a major crisis and kind of spiritual, mental health, spiritual 5 alarm fire. Once it was like once I finished that program and finished graduate studies, I had this, it was a couple of different things. I had this fire in me, like I need to get a graduate degree for some reason. I just had that notion in me that it was important for me to do that. And part of me feels okay with that because it is a sense of accomplishment, and there is something took a hell of a lot of dedication, especially because I was struggling so much towards the end just to make it through that program. But somehow I did it. But it wasn't like a healthy, burning love or passion or something that was driving me. But that ideology is so totalizing. And that experience with that and the ways that it totally derailed my life and psyche and mental health and so many things really makes me cautious about any kind of totalizing system. And sometimes religion can fit in. I mean, there's a healthy spirituality and there are more healthy forms of religious expression, but that kind of social justice, identitarian, woke, radical left, progressive project thing that's been going on for a long time is a kind of pseudo religion. And maybe if you are in a healthier place or not really closely involved with a lot of the activist elements of it and the kind of ideological formation of it, because you're not, I mean, college is one of the the main factories for this kind of ideology. And so I really just was kind of steeped in it, and my friend group and person I was dating, and it becomes such a totalizing lens that it just utterly dictates, in a sense, determines how you move through the world. And I had in me this notion that the noble thing to do with my life, the only worthwhile thing to do, was to work with the most downtrodden, or because you've got ideas of like white privilege, oppressor, oppressed. You've got just all this different conceptual framework and this overall kind of atmosphere, but all these things that are kind of driving you in that direction of, that it's a very kind of black and white dualistic way of looking at the world. There are the oppressed and there are the oppressors. There are certain identity categories that are elevated over others, the more kind of markers of marginalization, the kind of higher on that hierarchy. And so it just all channels your consciousness in this very specific way. Where I had kind of come to the notion that, and actually I had been working at a shelter, homeless shelter, prior to starting this program, and that's kind of what led me into the program. Given the ideological contours of everything that I was surrounded by, it kind of is just a logical outcome that it was like all that input. It was like this, whatever my spirit processed out of my mind, or whatever processed the information I was given the kind of ideological parameters that I had and the kind of rigid worldview. It was like the output was, you need to work with the most marginalized people. That's the only way that's the only meaningful thing you can do with your life. Now I can say that there probably was some truth in there. I mean, to the extent that I was connected with Christ at that point, or I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which you can kind of map a spiritual, something that might be a genuine spiritual impulse in you that kind of, you can kind of like shoehorn it in or map it onto a lot of these ideals. And spirituality is full of examples of radical poverty, radical humility, radical selflessness, radical compassion, radical acts of charity. And is it Matthew 25? It's actually, I think Matthew 25 was on the outside. That verse, I think, was quoted on the outside of this nonprofit that I was working at. Whatsoever you do unto the least of these little ones, you do also unto me. That idea of, when I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? I don't remember exactly how it's written, but so there are ways in which you can kind of read spirituality through this lens. And maybe there was something genuine within me, even though it had become very distorted and twisted, the want to do something good and useful with my life, but it becomes so clouded. And when you're living out of an ideology, and this is maybe part of the appeal, is you're living out of something that's transcends you in a way that the spiritual impulse and true spirituality, also moves. You could say something similar about spirituality, but this is sort of a counterfeit version of that. Sorry, I think my mind's too tired to go down that road. But yeah, so I mean, I guess I was just kind of exploring how did I get into that situation. And it sort of was predicated on totally ignoring my body, totally ignoring all the stuff that I was sitting on and not processing. And I was basically ideologically driven. Again, with some, heart in there. And I don't want to be overly critical about myself either, because I was sort of just doing the best that I could. I certainly wasn't trying to hurt anybody or anything like that. But I was in a ton of pain. And it was useful because when this woman who I was sort of apprenticing with, or she was a mentor, I guess, sort of just dropped that bomb, kind of pulled back the curtain on everything and said, "Oh yeah, don't be fooled. They're all stuffing their emotions," referring to the staff. I'm sort of recognizing now. I think I mean, on the one hand, it was like I was looking into the future and the not too distant future of this could very well be me in this position. I mean, it already is. I'm just not getting paid for it. But, the next step professionally would be. And in fact, after I finished the program, I got a call from the director, and he offered me a job there. And that was kind of another pivotal moment, decision point. You have these decision points in your life. So anyways, when she said that, it was like, I mean, part of the ideological project is it's this pseudo spirituality. Like I said, spirituality has as at its core salvation. Really, I mean, there's many names for it, but an alleviation from suffering or a transformation of suffering, a way to move through this world that is not the default of being addicted, distracted, in pain. And there's a salvific project there. And the same thing, there's kind of this utopian, salvific thing going on, at least in, that's kind of the sales pitch, or that's kind of implicit. Ultimately, it's a mirage in the case of this social justice project, because it's like it's perpetual atonement without liberation. It's like you're never pure enough. You're never doing the work hard enough. You've never gone deep enough into the depths of human misery to justify your privilege or justify your existence. You can never really atone. But I mean, in one sense, you could say it's, Ram Dass has this term, fierce grace, because part of me wants to say, seeing it so nakedly said, like, oh no, they're all stuffing, was like, don't kid yourself, man. This is like really difficult work, and it's taken a toll on all these people. It's not like I don't know what I was just in perpetual motion. I'm not even sure what I was thinking was going to happen. It was like, I finally get that. It was the culmination of like 2 years of just insanely hard work. And I mean, the goal I had in mind the whole time was I wanted to work with the homeless population. It's like that felt like the aligned thing for me to do. And I'd been doing that basically. I had worked at a shelter for a while. And then, I was doing these practicums. And I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I guess I thought there was some kind of redemption in doing that work. In a really unhealthy way, you could say it was like a martyr complex, or what's the term? Messiah complex. That wouldn't really be accurate, though. It wasn't really that feeling. It wasn't that grandiose. It was just more like, I don't know. I mean, it was just a really unhealthy place to be, and maybe there are people for whom this is genuinely their calling, and I think there are. I mean, I think I was just really ill-suited to the task, but the ideological place that I was in kind of didn't really. It's like ideology doesn't account for individuality. It's like the erasure of the individual for the ultimate good of this utopian vision or utopian project, or Although with leftism, I don't know that that's probably even saying too much. It's a pretty dystopian worldview in many ways, but it was like I was killing myself, basically. It was like a kind of self annihilation, which again has a correlate in spirituality that is more of a authentic, you know, Christ Himself talking about, lest. Let me not try to quote verses right now, but there is this notion in Christianity and in many spiritual traditions about killing the small self or self denial or you know part of what the spiritual project it does hopefully is transform your life such that there is uh, that you're part of a larger, that you're connected ultimately, that you're part of God, that you're not separate from, that you're connected to the highest and not just self-fixated. But there's a healthier way to do that, and even in spirituality it can get really unhealthy, talking about killing the ego and all this stuff that you kind of have to retranslate if you want to give it the benefit of the doubt. But typically it's probably just, generally speaking, it's probably just not healthy language. But even more so in these kind of totalizing political worldviews. I mean, it's the same thing with a cult as well. It's a sort of death of individuality in a way that's really, really harmful, really damaging. And so and for a variety of reasons, I was just vulnerable to that. And it didn't happen overnight. Again, this was years in the making but yeah, so forgive me for my stumbling around this topic. It's hard. It's late at night, early in the morning, actually, but it's also just a hard topic for me to talk about. So, yeah, I guess I think there are people, and I got the sense sometimes I met some of them who, because of their own life circumstances and whatever else they had going on, I think do find are relatively better suited to doing a job, really, something as intense as this job was. And for some of them, I think because it is part of a redemptive arc for them, people who have, really hit a specific kind of a rock bottom such that they are in a way better positioned to help people that are really in those dire straits. Well, I don't know. I mean, there can be all kinds of reasons that somebody might just, it might make sense for them. They might be called to work in that direction. But that it just really was not the right thing for me. I mean, it's a testament on the one hand to my willpower, I guess, and power to manifest that I moved as far in that direction as I did, getting that degree. But eventually what happened is my body, spirit, psyche just collapsed and broke. Um, sorry, my eye is really itchy. I've got liver issues, and when I'm stressed out, and maybe I'm hungry too, I don't know, I get itchy and my eyes get itchy. God damn it. Yeah. So, anyways, long story long. But I kind of was framing this, started this whole talk um, by this, this mentor that I was working with at this agency, this nonprofit, saying, everybody is stuffing here, and again, it was useful because it was like I could see myself being in that role in the not too distant future. I was like, is that really what I want for my life? Just killing myself for ideological purity. I wouldn't have been able to formulate that back then. But I think it also held up a mirror to me. It was like, holy shit, the only reason I've gotten as far on this road as I have is because I'm stuffing. And for me, it was workaholism, I guess is the way I was. And I think for her too, a little bit. But that was the way I was, you could say, managing my suffering, managing my pain, but avoiding would be probably more accurate. Doing this intense graduate program, a part of that ideological matrix that I was in is, very environmentally neurotic. It was like, I'm going to drive the car that I have as little as possible. It's a very fuel efficient car. And that's not bad. So it's again, in the wreckage of all this, there are still some things that, divorced from the kind of overarching, totalizing ideological map, but there are still certain values in there that are not totally bad, but a lot of them are. But anyway, so I was doing everything I could to decrease my carbon footprint, meaning, I was riding my bicycle everywhere. Sometimes I was running to places like it's sad to think about. My diet was getting more and more extreme. It was like I was doing like raw vegan. And so I had this like puritanical streak that was just permeating every aspect of my life. And I was just running myself ragged, trying to stay on top of it all, and deal with all the dark, dark stuff. I mean, you're looking into really dark, interfacing with really dark things in humanity. Doing that line of work. And again, God bless people that are called to do that. And I definitely gave it a good try. But ultimately, I mean, kind of the sad way to say it is, I am so unhealthy, you know. I couldn't sustain it. I just couldn't sustain it. I feel kind of ashamed on one level about that, to be perfectly honest. I know I shouldn't, but in a more healthy way of looking at it, I think the more loving thing to do is to find out, what is God actually calling me to do, you know? is it possible that he's not calling me to martyr myself to satiate the insatiable appetite of some kind of a uh, political, juggernaut political project? But man, that's been a very hard road since then, because I had invested so much of everything, my life, into that. And to see how corrupt, how wrong, how hurtful, how deceived I had become, I was. And I mean, I'd given it everything, really. There was no plan B. And what part of what's painful about it is self-deception. Again, I've come far enough on the path that, on the one hand, you don't want to duck accountability, but there's kind of a softening that happens the further you go along, where you're just like, you realize being overly accountable or you can be overly hard on yourself. It's like, in one sense, you're just doing the best you can. I was just doing the best that I could. And there are even qualities there within myself that I can look back and say, I admire how hardworking I am. I admire, and I'm kind of frightened by that fact, and also my strong willpower, I guess. That when I put my mind on something, it's like, even if it kills me, I'll accomplish it. There's something kind of admirable about that, but it's also a frightening thing to recognize, because it can and has caused a lot of harm for me. I can say, in the kind of wake of that, and the sort of PTSD of that era, one of the kind of perhaps not so good side effects or ripple effects, downstream effects of all that, is I've become it's very hard for me to commit to stuff now, because I've put so much effort into clearing that madness out of me, healing that fragmentation, getting that bullshit the fuck out of my system, that I'm very shy to re-engage with anything. It's like I want to be fully healed, or much more healed, before I start to commit, because it's like part of the reason I went down that road as far as I had is because of all the deeper layers of dysfunction I had inside of me, and pain and unresolved shit that this world entails that I'd been carrying. It's like I don't want to just recreate that. I can't recreate that. I just can't, you know? And so it's like how do you move in this world that is so confused, that is so lost, that is so hurting, this world that is in so much pain? How do you live in this world and not get lost yourself? And I don't think, we tend to gravitate around these great spiritual teachers, and they all have different stories, and they all have something to contribute, but I think a lot, a lot of them are very out of touch with the embodiment question. Now, maybe it's because they were able to embody and find, do things in a healthy way such that the path opened up and they sort of accomplished those developmental tasks. And so they moved on from it. Maybe that's the case. I think it's also possible eh, and that, there's this, at least the way I'm seeing it right now, it's kind of cynical, I guess, but it sort of makes sense that one would become a spiritual teacher just because the realities of living a sort of default existence, working blue collar jobs and not so much for the actual job description or the tasks or, you know, the actual work, but because you are I guess in a sense because of the cohort that you end up working with, and so not because people are bad. It's not like this is not like a superior inferior thing. It's just so few people are at that stage in their life where they've put a huge premium on healing. And when you're putting that much focus on healing and you just are constantly spending most of your waking life in very unhealed environments, you can sit up there on the cushion or, you know, at the pulpit or whatever and preach about embodiment and the importance of, you know, being in the world but not of the world, and grist for the mill, and but I think maybe spirit. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to say this.